Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. What is the most unbelievable paranormal experience that you had? Story 1. Haunted dormitory.
When I moved to college for my freshman year, I was assigned to one of the oldest dormitories on campus. These were massive towers housing thousands of students, and my room was on the 8th floor right at the top. My roommates and I shared a cramped space with a single bedroom, a small living area, and a bathroom. From the moment I moved in, I had an eerie feeling, but I dismissed it. After all, I always believed there was a logical explanation for everything. However, what happened in that dormitory defied reason. It was around spring semester when the disturbances became impossible to ignore. One night, I awoke to a scraping noise in our living room. I got up to investigate, thinking it might be one of my roommates. The sound was coming from our storage trunk, which we used as a table. It had a heavy padlock on it, and to my horror, the lock was swinging back and forth, scraping against the trunk's metal surface. My roommates were fast asleep. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination and returned to bed. Weeks later, our dormitory door began locking itself, something it was not designed to do. There was no automatic mechanism, yet I would step out to speak with friends across the hall and return to find the door locked. At times it felt as if someone was holding the handle from the inside, preventing me from entering. My roommates experienced the same thing, but none of us could explain how or why it was happening. Then the most chilling event occurred. It was winter, and our window remained shut and locked. The curtain always stayed drawn, yet one evening, as my roommate and I stood by the door preparing to leave, the curtain suddenly slid open on its own. For a brief moment, it held in place before being violently ripped from the bar as if unseen hands had torn it down. We stood frozen in shock before fleeing the room. The scraping padlock, the locked door, and the torn curtain, each event more terrifying than the last, convinced me that something was in that dormitory. To this day, I cannot rationally explain what we experienced. My roommate and I still talk about it, though it unsettles us every time. Something was watching us, lurking in that room. We just never saw it, but it saw us.
Story 2. Evil lived in our home.
For 4 long years, I lived in a house filled with unexplainable activity. It seemed to be centered in the basement, and unfortunately my bedroom was there. One of my earliest memories of the haunting was waking up to the sound of my mother's old television clicking through channels on its own. It was one of those older models with a physical knob, yet it kept shifting through static until it was finally moved to the basement. When my sister and I relocated our bedrooms downstairs, we would see eerie green lights glowing in the far corner. There was nothing there, just a bare concrete wall. Then, there were the disappearances. One afternoon I took a nap wearing a sapphire ring my mother had given me. When I woke up, it was gone. We searched everywhere, even removing the baseboards, but it was never found. One of the most terrifying moments happened while I was studying. Lying on the carpet, I noticed a footprint materializing beside my textbook. Frozen in fear, I barely had time to react before my bedroom door slammed shut behind me. A loud, angry bang struck it immediately after. My sister and I were alone one night when the basement television suddenly turned on. The video cassette recorder, which had a tape sticking out of it, began playing. No one had touched it. Another night, we had friends over and were sitting in the living room. The television's reflection revealed a man standing in the kitchen doorway. When my sister saw him too, she screamed. We all ran outside, horrified. The disturbances were not just in our house. I babysat a girl across the street when we heard glass shattering in the basement and lights flickering. Terrified, I grabbed her and ran home. The police found no evidence of a break-in. Things became physical. My mother was shoved so hard she nearly hit her head. My sister's friend woke up crying with a deep bite mark on her arm shaped like human teeth. The scariest of all were my dreams, glowing blue handprints covering my bedroom walls and sharp kicks to my back that left real pain lasting for days. I believe it was poltergeist activity fueled by the tension in our home. Whatever it was, those 4 years were a nightmare I will never forget.
Story 3. Ghostly visitors.
My mother is from Connecticut, and 2 of her cousins had their homes investigated by the famous paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren. The hauntings were very different, but both equally unsettling. One cousin lived with the lingering spirit of a Korean war soldier. Late at night, they would hear erratic shouting echoing through the walls, though no neighbors were close by. The most unnerving part was the television. When turned off, the dark screen would sometimes reveal a face staring back at them, unmoving, watching. The other cousin experienced something less menacing, yet just as unexplainable. A young girl, believed to have died from a fever in the early 1900s, seemed to linger in the house. At night, the sound of a ball bouncing down the hallway would wake her, followed by soft giggling. Though eerie, the presence never felt malicious, just playful. At the time, my mother's side of the family was deeply rooted in Catholicism, and they feared the hauntings might be something darker. The Warrens investigated both homes and determined the spirits were not harmful. Still, the cousin with the soldier's ghost had a priest bless the house, and the activity calmed down. The other cousin eventually moved but continued to hear the occasional laughter before she left. My mother always believed the women in our family might be conduits for lost souls, offering them a temporary haven. Our roots trace back to Massachusetts in the late 1600s, during the era of the witch trials. Some of our ancestors may have been accused of witchcraft. I do not know if that connection means anything, but the hauntings have never truly stopped, and sometimes I wonder if they ever will.
Story 4. Man in the Top Hat.
Years ago, I was dating a girl and we often spent time at her house. At first, the strange occurrences were small, objects falling from shelves without reason, the sound of a ball rolling in an empty upstairs room. I tried to ignore it, but things soon became impossible to dismiss. One night I was helping paint the stairway when something unsettling happened. A television was playing in the bedroom at the top of the stairs, an old, bulky model mounted on a swivel arm. Suddenly, the screen turned to loud static. No one was upstairs. I climbed the stairs to check, and to my shock, the television had rotated nearly 90 degrees, now facing an adjacent wall. The mount seemed sturdy, and the television was heavy, not something that could turn on its own. I stood there in silence, the static crackling in the empty room. But that was not the worst of it. Her young niece and nephew often visited, and on several occasions they would run out of their bedroom in tears, terrified. They spoke of a tall, shadowy man who would appear in their room watching them. He wore a black trench coat, a top hat, and most disturbingly, they claimed he carried a gun. The children even drew pictures of him, their crude sketches eerily similar each time. One night as I was leaving, I stood on the front stoop facing the house saying my goodbyes. Through the glass of the storm door I could see all the way to the back of the house. As I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, my eyes briefly glanced inside and I froze. There, at the rear of the house, stood a towering, shadowy figure. It was completely still, an ominous presence watching us. My breath caught in my throat. I looked again, and it was gone. When I told her what I had seen, she turned pale. She had never told me before, but others had seen the same figure lurking in the house. That was the last time I ever felt comfortable there.
Story 5. Footsteps in the dark.
After participating in a paranormal investigation, I experienced something that would haunt me for years. During the investigation, I didn't feel anything out of the ordinary, but I took several photos, especially in the basement. The pictures in the basement showed numerous orbs, which I initially dismissed as dust, but one picture stood out. There was a large orb with a smaller one next to it. At the end of the investigation, I left the house, unaware of the horrors that awaited me. When I got home, I decided to review the pictures. One particular image caught my attention in a photo of a cat in an upstairs window. I saw a large orb and a small orb, exactly the same as the ones in the basement. I brushed it off, thinking it was nothing, but the oddities did not stop there. Soon after, I began seeing things. A small boy would peek around corners, and I would occasionally catch glimpses of a man in his 30s, blonde, blurry, and fleeting. I heard strange sounds too, footsteps, the creak of wood underfoot, and the faint rustling of jeans as though someone was standing behind me. It was unnerving, but I convinced myself I was imagining things. Then one night, the terror escalated. My young sons were asleep upstairs when I heard one scream in terror, followed by another loud sob. Then the second child screamed and ran downstairs, as if being chased by something unseen. This had never happened before. It was unlike anything I had experienced as a parent. Fear surged through me. I stood at the foot of the stairs and screamed into the silence, demanding whatever was haunting us, leave my children alone. I knew there was nothing I could do, but I promised to make it regret its actions. The next day, while sitting downstairs with my sons, I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots walking across the second floor. The steps were slow, deliberate, and very loud, yet the floor was carpeted. The terror that gripped me in that moment was indescribable. There was no denying it. It wasn't my imagination anymore. I don't question my experiences now. I know I am clairaudient, able to hear spirits more clearly than I can see them. I often hear voices or sounds in empty rooms. The unmistakable sound of someone moving nearby, even though no one is there. Years ago, when my brother passed away, I heard him whisper my name several times, and I saw his shadow in the doorway. I feared he would be angry with me, but instead he came to me. He had taken his own life in a prison cell, and I never had the chance to truly understand him before it happened. I deeply regret not acknowledging him when I had the chance. Even now, my grief remains, but I believe he's found peace. My daughter once dreamed of him, and he was kind to her. He came to her at a playground, talking with her, offering her comfort.
Story 6. Curse of the Spirit.
I was deeply fascinated by religions, and had spent years studying as many as I could, including Spiritism. I had just finished reading the Book of the Spirits, and was eagerly anticipating the sequel, the Book of the Mediums. This particular night, I was at my girlfriend's house, a day before my birthday. As usual, we were watching horror movies, my favorite genre. At 11 p.m., we went to sleep in separate rooms due to her strict parents. I went to her aunt's room, and she went to her grandmother's room. As I lay down, I quickly fell into a relaxed state, but suddenly, a photo board, filled with several photographs, fell on me, waking me up with a start. I wasn't frightened, just surprised. I was about to turn the lights on when my girlfriend came into the room and did it for me. We laughed about it, and as it was already after midnight, she gave me my birthday present, a brand new copy of the Book of the Mediums, with a picture of her as a bookmark. I was thrilled. I began reading the first few pages, which included the following warning. There are those who think that messing with spirits is a joke or a pastime. They are mistaken, for meddling with spirits involves dangers and even death. That line stuck with me. I didn't mention it to her, not wanting to alarm her. She asked me if I wanted her to remove the photo board, but I tried to knock it down and said, "No, it won't fall again." That's when I made a grave mistake. As I was just about to fall asleep, the second photo board fell. This time, fear gripped me. I knew this wasn't a coincidence. Something was messing with me. I tried to turn on the lights but couldn't find the switch. My headlamp wouldn't work, and in sheer panic, I called my girlfriend to come back. When she arrived, I was curled in the corner of the room, crying and pointing at the bed where the photos had fallen. I refused to sleep in that room again. She took me to the living room, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't sleep. When I closed my eyes, horrific visions plagued me. I saw myself hurting my loved ones, and I felt completely lost, as if I had forgotten how to pray. Eventually, I heard a voice next to me, but when I looked, there was no one there. Terrified, I ran to her grandmother's room, sitting quietly on the side of the bed, waiting for something to emerge. Nothing happened, but my heart was still racing. The next morning, I woke up surrounded by several crucifixes on her grandmother's wall. I had never known she was that religious, but in that moment, I felt a sense of protection. I never slept in that room again, and I never again tried to explore spiritism on my own.
Story 7. Haunted Hospital.
I work the night shift at an old building, originally constructed in the early 1900s as a Catholic hospital. It has since been repurposed as an assisted living home, but the building's past still lingers. Over the course of my time here, I've encountered some unsettling and at times terrifying experiences. There are 4 spirits who frequent the halls, each with their own peculiarities. The first is the peeker. He hides around corners, his face slowly emerging further as you walk by. If you catch him, he darts away, vanishing just before you can get a closer look. It's unsettling, but oddly amusing, since multiple co-workers have also spotted him. Next, there are the nuns. These apparitions are seen in the reflections of glass, walking alongside us or drifting across the rooms. One nun in particular seems to walk on the 5th floor. Her footsteps echo loudly behind you, yet no one is ever there. On one occasion, a resident who could see spirits casually mentioned a lady in a veil hovering over my shoulder. When I asked if the spirit was upset with me, the resident said, "She must be, because she just left." Then, there is the dark man. This figure, dressed entirely in dark clothes, stands silently in the shadows. He's been seen by several residents and co-workers, leaning against walls, silently watching. No one knows who he is, and while he hasn't caused harm, his presence is always chilling. Lastly, the long man is perhaps the most horrifying. He only appears to residents, towering above them with a terrifying grin. He begins in the ceiling and extends into the doorway, his body stretching unnaturally. When a resident screams, he vanishes into the floor. I've had my own share of terrifying experiences too. One night, while mopping near the kitchen, I saw a man's face staring at me through the small glass window. His skin was unnaturally pink, his eyes wide open in a strange expression. When I looked away and looked back, he was gone. Later, a milk jug on the table flew off and shattered. I half-jokingly blamed the ghost for being upset. Another night, I found myself cursing under my breath in the hallway near the old head nun's office. Almost immediately, the heavy fire doors slammed shut with a loud bang. I was terrified, thinking an angry spirit was behind them. These experiences have become part of my nightly routine, but each encounter leaves me feeling more and more unsettled. There's something eerie about this place, and I often wonder just how much of it is tied to the building's history.
Story 8. When Spirits Speak.
When I was 15, I lived in an extended family household. A few weeks after my grandfather passed away, I found myself home alone one afternoon. I decided to play some music on the stereo, turning the volume up a bit as I went about my chores. What happened next still haunts me to this day. I had only been out of the room for a few minutes when I suddenly heard the music begin to change on its own. It wasn't just skipping tracks. The stereo started playing completely different songs, one after the other. I froze, standing in the hallway, feeling the chill creep up my spine. The volume of the stereo, which was a separate amplifier unit, began to rise and fall on its own, as if it were alive, adjusting itself for around 20 seconds. Then, the room temperature plummeted, goosebumps prickled across my skin. Still unable to move, I nervously called out, "Pop, if you don't like the music, I can turn it off." My voice trembled, but there was no response. The music suddenly stopped. I was paralyzed with fear. I gathered enough courage to yell out, "I am coming down to the lounge now," and I hurried down to investigate, my heart pounding in my chest. In the living room, the stereo doors were shut, the CD player was paused, the amplifier was off, and even the graphic equalizer was turned off as well. Everything had been shut down completely. To this day, I swear that my grandfather didn't like the music I was playing, and he made his displeasure very clear that day. During my teenage years, I started seeing blurry or distorted outlines of what I believed to be spirits or entities, and these experiences terrified me. After months of strange visitations which I thought were from my grandfather, I decided to confront one of the entities. I reached my hand out toward it, and where our hands intersected, I felt a tingling sensation. I asked the entity to stop visiting me, as it was scaring me, and after that, I never saw it again. Since then, I've encountered around 4 or 5 distinct entities, but the visitations stopped once I entered my early 20s. Now in my late 40s, I rarely experience anything supernatural, but those memories of my grandfather's visitations still linger in my mind.
Story 9. The Alley of Shadows.
I used to walk my dog every evening when I lived in Brooklyn. It was just a quick potty break before bed, walking around the block. But there was one particular spot that never sat right with me. Every time I walked by, I felt like someone was watching me, like they were about to jump out from the shadows. Strangely, my dog didn't seem to mind. He would often stop at that exact spot and sit down completely still, not asking for a treat, not even looking at me, just waiting. One night, as we approached that spot again, my dog sat, just like usual. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of his leash clasp hitting the pavement. I looked down. His leash was on the ground. My dog was looking at me, his eyes empty. In an instant, he darted off into the dark alley behind the houses. The alley was overgrown with bushes and ivy. My dog was excited, running wild, while I stood there frozen, panic rising in my chest. My heart raced as I realized that if he hadn't stopped to relieve himself, I might have never caught up with him. I rushed into the alley, grabbed his leash, and ran back toward the street, my body filled with cold sweat. That night, I promised myself I would never walk on that side of the street again. The next evening, I crossed to the other side of the street to avoid that cursed spot. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. Suddenly, there was a loud metallic slam, a sound like something hitting the parking sign across the street. My heart skipped a beat as I spun around, but there was nothing there. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had haunted that spot was angry. Angry that I hadn't returned.
Story 10. The Locked Door Mystery.
I used to live in an old house that was haunted by the ghost of an elderly lady. She and her husband had built the house in the 1920s or 1930s, and had lived there until they passed away. I believe they died around 2003 or 2004. In 2008, I rented the house from their son after he had done extensive renovations. My family was the first to actually live in the house since they had passed, with the son only coming on weekends to clean and maintain the house. At first, I didn't think much of it, but soon I started seeing things almost every day. Shadows would move across the walls, and I could hear the sound of doorknobs rattling when no one was around. Footsteps echoed throughout the house even when I was alone. We would often smell cigarettes, followed by a strong perfume scent, even though no one smoked in the house. However, two experiences stand out in my memory. The first occurred when I was taking a shower. I always opened the old wood-framed bathroom window because there was no exhaust fan. One day, while I was showering, the window suddenly shut and latched on its own. I thought my girlfriend had done it, but when I opened the curtain to check, I saw that the door was still closed and I was alone in the bathroom. The second incident was far more chilling. My girlfriend and I were sitting on the couch, watching television late one night. To our left was an open doorway that led to the kitchen. On the opposite side of the room was the laundry room, which led to the garage. Out of nowhere, we both heard the handle to the laundry room door jiggle. We looked over just in time to see the door swing open about 2 feet, then close again, latch and lock itself. My girlfriend screamed, and I immediately jumped up, thinking someone had broken in. I rushed over to the door, but when I opened it, the laundry room door was locked from the inside. The garage door was also locked, and all the doors and windows were securely closed. I turned on the floodlights outside, but there was no sign of anyone. After ensuring everything was locked and secure, we sat down to talk about what had just happened. To our shock, we both described the same eerie sequence of events.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.